final frontier is it, Star Trek? Today on Trekland Tuesdays Live with me, Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek, coming at you right from the heart of Trekland through Portal 47 for some clarity, sanity, and the big picture in things Star Trek. But let me dive right in. Because I saw we're in a time of little news, but there were two things that piqued my attention. First off, congratulations to NASA and JPL and everybody that landed our first helicopter to fly on, our first flight vehicle of any kind to fly on another planet off of the Perseverance. I always want to say Perseverance and go old English. The Perseverance rover that's landed and our new little drone. Everybody saw that, celebrated. It's increasingly just like the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk. The little test flight, little hop, bigger hop. Big deal. It was awesome. In the middle of all the crap we're dealing with on Earth, all our land-based problems and evolution and growth, that we can see another major milestone like that. It's awesome. It's awesome. And it brought to mind something I stumbled across. You know, when you set your news feed to alert for Star Trek, no telling what you're going to get. And I came across what the title today came from. Was an article I found from BU Today. And of course, being, from Big 12 country, I thought Baylor? No. This was Boston University. The East Coast mindset would have got that faster. Interesting topic. Interesting here by a woman. The article's by Rich Barlow, but it's about a woman, Joel Renstrom. She is a College of General Studies senior lecturer in rhetoric who was from BU, Boston University. Anyway, her article entitled, just posted on the 26th, or yesterday actually, Manned Missions, Conquering Space, the Problem with Space Lingo. Okay, this is about, she's a lecturer, professor in rhetoric, and very much so. Words, as we have been watching this last year, this last decade, and as we look back over the centuries, words are problematic. And she's intersected with space here. And yes, the very title, Manned Missions, good NASA, as she points out, 20, 30 years ago. I still want to say the center instead of the Johnson Spacecraft Center in Houston. And which of these flights were manned and which were unmanned, and that whole, we've gotten to crude. Not crude as in CRUDE, but crude as in with a crew, right? And some of these issues, it's easy. We can become a little bit self-aware, and yay. What's been interesting the last 5-10 years, you would think after the post-World War II world on Earth, good old Sol 3, finally shaking off the colonialist attitudes post-war of the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and liberation, and unfortunately, a lot of places where the population weren't ready for that were taken advantage of by strongmen, dictators, fascists, you name it, whatever. Even communists, the blunt end of communism, like Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. Okay, that was a different case actually, but you know what I'm saying. The term colonialism it's come back in vogue the last 5-10 years because we're looking at colonialism in many more ways than having a military and flying a flag. There's cultural colonialism. We get that. I feel embarrassed every time. And we would see Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's everywhere. And I was just like, oh, that's all they know us for. Everywhere? Really? Everywhere? So yes, it's a multifaceted, multi-layered thing. What's interesting here is that Joel Renstrom wrote a piece intersecting that whole awareness, wokeness, if you will, with space. And what really got me was a couple of her words, and some of this is obvious. I already mentioned manned flights. Okay, words do have power. She wrote a white paper. She teaches classes about space and science fiction, so she's not wandering in from this kind of pure rhetorical field and speech communication field. She has a bearing there. She has enough geekness to be able to this walk. One of the things she talked about she's mentioning here that in John F. Kennedy's speech from 1962 about landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth before this decade is out, and she is for saying conquering space. Well, my initial take on that 10, 15 years later, because I wasn't paying attention then, was that conquering is a little bit, she's saying it's a little bit colonialist, but I think it's just offbeat anyway, because we tend to think of anything off the surface of the Earth as space, but we get it now. And the more you dive into your science fiction, much like actual space dynamics, when you look at how far the two Voyager, Voyager 1 and 2, let's say, they're still putting out beeps and signals, and they have a Twitter account, and they're just now getting out beyond the solar system, and they've been gone for 20, 30 years. We have near space, we have our atmosphere, we have near space, we have the inner planets, we have the outer planets, we have solar system, we have low space. I mean, even without going into quadrants, we have local space, we have the local, and then we've got the galactic scale, and then we've got the intergalactic void to the next galaxy. Is overwhelming at times, but we can at least agree on there is a sense of scale here. And yes, our tiny little meager, even Kirk's and then Picard's, even the 32nd century propulsion we're seeing in Discovery is only going to get you so far so fast. And unless you're doing some kind of spatial trajector, or you're doing Q flashes or something, where you're bending space completely different way, is going to make those leaps and bounds. Maybe traveler speed, what we saw in Where No One Has Gone Before. But you know what I'm saying here? Conquering space is a little egotistical. That was my take on it. It's like you get to the moon, you get to Pluto, you get to Alpha Centauri. You ain't conquering space. You're conquering space right in front of you. So I just thought it was a facetious term. Her problem, Dr. Renstrom, doctorate, is she said it gets back to the idiom of conquering, as in a home country over nativist colonial, over things that don't belong to you or that weren't yours, their agreement. Okay, conquer is kind of a militaristic term. It was the 60s, what can I say? A lot of times we think about conquering, the polio virus or conquering COVID or something, and it does feel a little weaponized, when all we're trying to do is bring light to the dark. Maybe that's what... Okay, fine. I don't know of anybody that talks about conquering space today, but she uses it as an example. And I think it's something that we kind of gotten out of our black-white Cold War era, too. She criticizes Trump for saying manifest destiny when he talked about space travel. Well, that's a Trump thing. I don't know if anybody these days is thrilled to use the term manifest destiny, except because of the implication. It used to be that it was the destiny of white Americans to take over the whole continent. We realized how problematical that was. We're gonna wipe out the natives, and we're gonna bring along our slaves with us. See, not too big. It was a historical thing. But then here's what got me going. I'm not screaming up and down, but I was like, really? She has a problem with using the term frontier, because she's pointing out that the feeling, the vibe of frontier to one perspective is, the unexplored space, but that means, as in America, let's say, as in South America, as in Africa, the frontier, when you have terms like darkest Africa or the Orient and the Occident, we're all oriented to one point of view. Not the point of view, but one point of view. Orient means, the Far East. Well, it was the Far East from a European standpoint looking eastward. It made no sense if you were in the Americas looking westward. I mean, that's just on semantics. But it was a big clumping, the frontier, as in pushing the frontier, meant you were pushing not the exploration back here and settlement, but you were pushing somebody else out. True. Frontier, though, is not a bad word. It's just, let's remember whose point of view we're talking about. And then what you're doing with that frontier is up to you. So, we're broad brushing the word here, but she's talking about frontier, and then she specifically says, oh, no, as in the final frontier? I'd have to give up my addiction to Star Trek. And she says, yeah, I grew up on Star Trek too. I always thought it was a geeky reference, not a colonialist one. So here we go. Do we think that saying the word frontier is like an entitlement word that opens the door to use resources? I mean, one of my hero, Will Rogers, in the 1930s, in the middle of the Dust Bowl and watching the middle of the continent blow away and talking about why, and trying to see the revolution and awareness of all the ag sciences, that too much land was plowed, overplowed, all the ag things that had to be learned, because in the beginning we just had a continent. Just, go down and cut another tree, there'll always be another one. Go plow up more land, there'll always be more. And he made a statement one time, and I love this to death, in the 30s. He said, we talk about pioneers and honoring our pioneers. And he said, if we, in one sense, and I know this isn't all, but in one sense that opened eyes and hopefully minds, Will once said, if we looked history square in the eye, we'd have to admit that a pioneer was no more than somebody who wanted something for nothing. And in many cases, that's not true. There are people that explore for the purity of science. There are people that explore for the feeling of, well, I say history and destiny, but oops, there's that word destiny. My destiny might interfere with the destiny of wiping somebody else out. That is a thing. That is a thing. My point here is that space is not exactly the confines of continents on Earth. I don't think by the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, true, there was not a space on Earth that was empty. To the chagrin of comments just this last weekend from good old Rick Santorum. But that's very true. That's very true. The point of view of the person doing the exploring and the colonizing often overlooks the little thing that was there, especially if you're the victor. Now, if you go touch base somewhere and you encounter, if you go to Skull Island and you encounter Kong, there's a good chance that you might not be the colonizer there in the long run. You may stumble into something you wish you hadn't stumbled into. And of course, that's grist for the mill in a lot of science fiction stories too over the years, much less Star Trek. Be careful what you wish for, Lieutenant. You may get it. But inherently, we're always trying to talk about our formula for estimating life in the universe and estimating habitable planet, good old class M's. We're getting better and better and better at having telemetry, having long range scans, knowing how to interpret scans and radiation and motion, and being able to pick up on what are we figured out what are potentially life-bearing stars that would have planets, even much less looking at individual planets. Now we have thousands of planets now that we're in one spectrum or another, with one degree of certainty or another, talking about being, for lack of a better term, and why not use it, good old class M's. Planets approximating Earth-Mars conditions, right, that we get from Star Trek. I so hope real science adopts the class system that Star Trek evolved. At least having class M be life-bearing. They didn't do that with stellar classes and planetary numbering, but maybe they can get it right with planetary classes. Anyway, so our article writer here, and I've got to get back to her name. It's Renfield, right? Renstrom. Her worry about the term frontier, and now she's going to have to renounce it. She's being a little tongue-in-cheek, but still. A word is a word, but a lot of words had perfectly innocuous meanings until they were poisoned by some particular case and usage along the way, some case in history, right? A lot of words just had completely different meanings until they were overcome by history. Gay used to have a completely different, the gay 90s. And gay Paris is not what we think of the mainstream meaning of a gay today. I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying it's a historical fact. It's a linguistic fact, a connotative fact. And I hate to see words dignified. Of course, you have to deal with the context. If you're talking right now, sure. I just think if we're talking about far future, Do we really want to say frontier is a bad word? Because here's the point. Here's the really bottom line. That's what Star Trek is about. I mean, yes, and Kirk and Picard all do, and etc. all say space the final frontier from Earth, from local space, from a Federation point of view. But that's exactly the point of conflict. That's exactly the point of drama and storytelling, right? That's exactly the point of everything from, I don't know, Arena, and figuring out that the planet you claimed is already claimed by another species, and you inadvertently stumble into their place. And there we're talking about two bipedals. Okay. A lizard and a slow-moving lizard and an even slower-moving human fighter. And you're fighting it out on a planet, a neutral place, right? By these other guys who are just trying to teach you a lesson in their own weird way that they think your level is able to deal with. But at the end of the day, Starfleet and the Federation do say, oops, maybe we need to get this down better. Maybe we need to get our tech better. Now, that's a case where the Gorn are running around looking bipedal. They've got a little more than a few bumpy heads, bumpy-headed forehead, but they're running around in spaceships, right? They're kind of like recognizably whatever. You got the case of, let's say, home soil, right? The ugly bags of mostly water speakers. The Valarans, not the most adept produced episode, but the point of it is really good and really easy to produce, actually. But the whole point of the episode was, looking for life where we don't expect it. Hey, Devil in the Dark, the Horta, the whole takeaway from the episode that we all kind of take away is that the Horta is not a monster. It's another being that we can communicate with, that we can empathize with. It's silicon. It's about as alien as it gets. Well, not really, but for the 60s, it was doing great. We talk about how not only do we realize it's not a monster and just kill the other monster. Great lesson to learn, by the way. Don't kill the other. If only the salt vampire had had the same manager that the Horta had. But we have the Horta, we have the babies, we have hatching, we have a cooperative mining agreement. Oh, it's so Star Trek. But what happened to Janus 6 then? Now, I know the books explored this. As the babies hatched and we were down to one life form, the mother, and that's their life cycle over thousands of years. And now the planet's repopulated, right? With all of her babies, all in one generation that will eventually die down. Gosh, Kirk and Spock always had such great timing. They get to the planet right when this entire population is at its lowest ebb. They come grab that per gem. Resources, yes. But the story ends up with a cooperative agreement where the Horta are recognized as a sentient life form, even, right? They're doing a deal. They're doing a treaty with it. So part of this translates, it's not just the human relations, the not human rights, which itself would be speciesist, but gentle being rights, as they would say on the animated series. But what's the legal status of their planet, the world? The Federation might approach them for membership, but nobody's talking about making Janus 6 a colony, right? So it was a frontier area. They had to explore. They had to find it. There was a rough first contact, but eventually contact 1A didn't do so badly after all. And that's the point of Star Trek stories. Say all you want to about the Gormagander on Discovery being a cool space. We never did get back to the giant jellyfish aliens from Farpoint. And were they native to that? The Bandi were native to that world, the humanoids. Where did the giant space-going jellyfish come from? They were obviously sentient because they were interpreting the empathy of emotion. Or they were having emotions that Pilot Deanna interpreted. I mean, there's all these examples of there's nothing wrong with having the point of view of a frontier being the place you have not explored yet, physically or mentally or culturally, as long as all that is your own point of view reference line. If you don't bring to it what came to be, and was it even in the 1800s, switching back to North America, was it even, I mean, yes, manifest destiny was a goober philosophy, a thing that was enunciated by the 1840s and 1850s. Part of it driven by the South trying to make sure they had more land to expand slavery into so they could keep the Senate even. But I don't, it's the overwhelming mindset. I don't know if terminology by that time would have averted anything else. If you'd already had 200-300 years of pushing natives before you as you went, becoming, increasingly uneasy and then giving up, or someone secretly keeping on the culture, keeping the language going, even along the eastern seaboard where the first indigenous white contact happened. But we seem to have evolved. We're still learning. We have many more mistakes to go, and God forbid we got a lot of mistakes to fix right now. And, it's not just happening in the States. This is a Canadian issue, Australia. And I don't mean to be a culturalist here and wipe out and ignore all the other frictions that are happening, among the tribal peoples across Africa. Oh my God, the Rwandan genocide was all about this, about one wiping out the other, and not even being gallant about it. Just heads up, we're going to wipe you out. Good old genocide, a word we didn't have invented until we needed it for the Holocaust. And it couldn't even be applied to the original Armenian genocide until after the fact. Another genocidal moment that we finally had recognized. Words do have meaning. Power does have meaning. Leadership, filtering down to the people, does have meaning, and mindset. I was amazed at where I went with this when I got to reading her piece here. I hated to see a word like frontier be tarred and feathered for all eternity, especially since she's coming at it from a geek perspective here, or at least mentions that in passing, because she does get up. I think the point of Star Trek is to show what happens as you explore and colonize. Most of the colonies I think we've got mentioned in the Federation sphere are colonies that were unexplored planets that and then you have the mystery of the Tarchanans and what happened to that landing part. Sometimes it's not even a colony. Hopefully that's what a survey party is there to see, right? Hopefully that's what they're there to do, to make sure that you're not stepping on any Valarans. You're not stepping on any substrata life forms that are not big bipedal bumpy heads walking around, because that's what most life is going to be in the universe. We know. That's why you occasionally show where you actually show on some kind of a budget another alien life that you're able to communicate with. Yay, universal translator. We're scanning its spectrum, its radiological spectrum, and that's how we're going to communicate with it. That's why maybe the one that's the most overlooked of all, the moment, Wrath of Khan, we do not think about for first contact. But remember, before Khan, before all of the drama of the Wrath of Khan, the reunion, the revenge, all of that, the space battle, remember the very initial pages of the Wrath of Khan, the Reliance mission? They're trying to find a suitable test planet for the Genesis device test. Remember? There can't be a single microbe of life. The protocols were laid down for testing this sucker. And the Reliant had been out there for how long trying to find a completely dead planet? I would think there'd be a completely dead moon. Seems like they were having a lot of problems finding a completely dead planet. Maybe it had to be a suitable mass. Maybe your typical, moon, your typical dead body wasn't going to. And I forget if they get into this in the novelization to kind of flesh it out. I should have checked that first, but I'm sure somebody can look. That was the issue with, she's, Dr. Bibi Besh is saying there can't be one microbe here. Dr. Marcus is saying there can't be one microbe. And they're, stomping around and humming and hawing. And Terrell and Chekhov are like, oh my God, we've been looking and looking and looking, and we think we've actually found one. And she's like, you better check it out, which is the whole reason for being down on the planet. So something screwed up anyway, because not only did they not see, of course, their sensors were messed with. Yeah, it's a Star Trek story. If they'd had perfect sensors, we never would have had the damn story to begin with, right? We wouldn't have had the trilogy. Who knows where the Enterprise would have been when the whale probe came? We wouldn't have had the story, but also it's not just a matter of the con survivors, the Botany Bay survivors. It's what about the SETI eels? And if the SETI eels are there, there's got to be some kind of a food chain. There's got to be some kind of a biome that supports their life when there's not humans around to jump in the ears of and live that way. And what do they really? That's their defense mechanism. Well, here's a biology lecture for somebody to jump in on. Here's one for Mohammed or somebody to take on. But point here is that was a protocol built into the Federation specs for testing the Genesis device. And hey, there's the scientists and the military knocking heads, but that much was agreed upon. So I just have a feeling that Ms. Renstrom's piece here, and I'm sorry if she's a lecturer, so I'm going to assume she's not a doctorate. So no disrespect either way. Joelle's worrying about using the word frontier from Star Trek. Now, she does point out, going back to our Mars lander, she's saying, she says, no one's talking about like colonizing Mars and what about conquering the red planet? And she says, we don't know if there's microbial life on Mars. And then she says, I know no one is going to worry about colonizing microbes. And she says, well, she would. And so would Carl Sagan. And she points out that he was saying, if there is life on Mars, even microbial life, then Mars belongs to the microbes. I mean, this is a little bit of the whole, even if there's no one living in this area, we should leave it be. Whether it's scenically beautiful or resource rich or whatever. There's the exploiters and there's the, even if it's a park that's preserved and we trample it with tourism, that's problematical. These are all the inflection points. These are all the lines of intersection that we deal with all the time. And we're just still doing it here on Earth. So I get it. We're landing landers on the moon. And we've got more people going back to the moon. And the moon looks pretty dead, but we still don't know. Mars, and the moon is a moon, right? Mars is a bigger mass body, more climate, more interaction. We're learning more about the history of its climate. Talking about, she says, examination is different than colonization. She asks a rhetorical question. Well, maybe we study the microbes and we could learn how to cure disease on Earth. Could be. You never know what's going to happen to that. What's the butterfly ripple effect here? What are you doing? How are we ever going to find lithium on the 5th moon of Jupiter for the first time if we don't take it easy? But there's things we do in ignorance, and that's why first contact protocols and scanning planets, and even the Vulcans were keeping an eye on planets. You could call that spying and espionage, but the whole thing about not only are they waiting for us to get warp drive, they're watching planets that are further back down on the timeline, let's say. So anyway, she basically ends up her thing. Her target, is there a danger that worrying about rhetoric will spark charges of political correctness? How many hate crimes and insurrections do you need to see before you realize they're not just words? The backlash usually comes from one kind of person, old white guys. I know. I'm agreeing with most of what she's saying. She's coming from being a Star Trek fan. I just want to remind everybody that words are just words until they're used or abused or even weaponized by others. And to call out Star Trek, yeah, it was the 60s and it's what was happening. I mean, Alaska's state motto is the last frontier. And that's kind of what was in the zeitgeist when the final frontier. We can check out the etymology origins of the final frontier. But it was very Kennedy-esque, the way original series was, people love to say. I just think frontier, as long as we bear in mind that a frontier is our point of view of being unexplored, but we're going to bump up against other folk, whether there's a neutral zone has to be put up or not, right? And that can be a conflict point, or it can be a cooperation point. I just don't think there's anything inherently wrong with the term frontier. All the planets that are mined for the lithium, whether it's the native world that's pre-warp, and how do you deal with that? Do you show up for a cut every year in your pinstripes? No, I know that's not the lithium, but anyway, dealing with these cultures is what Star Trek is all about. Dealing with those intersections and those conflicts is what Star Trek is all about. So I don't think calling out Star Trek for potentially misusing the term frontier is such a bad thing. And heaven knows, in 55 years, we've already watched Star Trek reflect the evolutions in some culture. So just to say, anyway, I don't know. Did that land with a thud? I haven't been. I'll look at the chat and catch up here in just a second. But I don't know. Did that get your brain thinking? Because we are assimilating so much. A lot of the pushback, a lot of the civil strife we're having in all of our cultures, especially here in the States right now, is we're doing a whole lot of catch up on awareness. A whole lot of people are finding their voice and saying, mm-mm. And even you well-mining people that are staying silent aren't doing us any favors. And I'm sorry if you never thought about this, but here's your chance. When we project it into the future, and listen, we have legal about resource mining exploitation. There are legal agreements, everything from the South Pole in Antarctica to the moon and Mars. There are outer space treaties that were put in place in the 60s to head some of this off. And you know what? This is an issue that even For All Mankind, shout out to Ron's series that the Okudas worked on, Steve Oster line produced. That's an issue in For All Mankind because they're starting to colonize and exploit the moon. And the moon is a dead world, or is it? Much less what we find on Mars or any of the other planets. And we get out of our rut of what life is. We're in the baby steps of Star Trek thinking there now. But, the Expanse gets into this too. I mean, this world of law and intersecting with the pressure points of exploitation. It's an amazing amalgam here of resources and management. And is capitalism going to extend to that? Does that mean some are winners and some are losers? Is it made so that it benefits everybody? Is that socialism, or is that Alaska giving its oil revenue to all of its residents equally? It's all in point of view. It's all in point of view. And as we go out into space right now, it seems like it's mostly empty. But someday somebody's going to look at us and say that we're mostly bags of ugly water, ugly bags of mostly water. How about that? The point of view will be on the other shoe if they wear shoes. And it's all things to think about now. I worry that we're in danger of all those idealistic treaties from the 60s and 70s. Now that we're coming down to the tech levels of being able to travel and exploit and mine asteroids and the moon and Mars, are we suddenly people are going to start ignoring those as Pollyanna, or start moving to at least make amendments to things that get away from the ideals of those early space treaties? Just here in our system. We'll see. Something to keep an eye on. As we spin these yarns and go out to the final frontier, those are big issues out there. And the lawyers are on top of it. The sociologists and psychologists and culturalists and social workers are on those kind of issues if they have a foot in the geek world. Or maybe they make it a career. And here's one linguist who's talking about the power of words. We've already been there. Maybe we can do better the second time around. Maybe we don't have to tarnish every word with its use and abuse. We'll see. That issue of exploration, examination versus colonization, that will be interesting to pursue. All right, guys. One more? Because I always love these guys. Remember the Pelier Zellians? How they had the home planet of Peliers? I mean, Picard got brought in to mediate it, and it was kind of a big thing, and it suddenly became the B plot in the bigger story. But I always loved how and they had the see-through noses and their throat lines. I always loved how there was Pelier Zel had two moons, Alpha and Beta. How great it was for them to adapt, once again, our Greek alphabet from our ancients. But the Pelier Zelians already had two moons that were already fighting with each other in the home world. It was awesome. But hey, there's a case of alien colonization, independence, and friction. Anyway, don't forget the Pelier Zelians. I always love that. I love that. So, did that get you thinking, Benny? Did that stir anything up for you? I hope it did. I hope it did. I'll see what's going on in the chat in just a minute. But for right now, that's it for me on the soapbox this week. But I also do want to thank all of our TTLers, our Trekland Tuesdays Live Club. So here's our shout out. They're all on our Patreons. Yes, yes. So thank you once again, Blaze K, Robin Wilson, Lawrence Todd, Anne-Marie Siegel, Blake Arledge, Justin Porteous, and Nathaniel Robinson. And yes, our live wires, Rusty Harrell, been there from the beginning, Halberd Gun Johnson, Jalen Bullock, Gary Williams, Jared Cooper, Mr. Vestek, Robert McLean, and Casey Caskey. Yeah, no, Casey. You know I love you. Mostly. Especially here. They're all part of my Patreon. If you're not familiar with Patreon, it's a way you can support creatives one at a time on projects or even on a subscribing ongoing basis. I have a very simple $5, $10 level if you want to help me expand the live stream here a little bit, since it's not really sponsored. These are my sponsors. So it's patreon.com/TreklandLive. You can find a lot of others there. It's the end of the month, so if you want to jump in, if you've been thinking about it, if you appreciate this, and Life Support Live also benefits too, I appreciate it. It's a very easy way for folks to come in and support everything Trekland. Okay. Otherwise, everything Trekland also includes our podcast at Roddenberry, the Trek Files. And this week we've got the widow, longtime, the last wife, I should say, but the last 30 years, with Herb Solow, the late great Herb Solow, who bought Star Trek for Desilu and then worked with Gene the first couple of years. Harrison Solow, who wrote a book about Gene in the 90s and was with him as he died. We had her on before. This week, she's back on the Trek Files to talk about her years at that same time with Majel. And it's some more amazing first-person storytelling. We start with the thank you notes she basically drafted for all of those who spoke at Gene's funeral or wrote Majel condolences. We start off with the thank you note she drafted for President Reagan, former President Reagan at the time. Anyway, it's another great one, and I really want to thank Harrison for being on the show with us. And here's a shout out to my good friend Bonnie Moss for helping get Harrison and I back together after we'd lost touch from the 90s. So thank you there. I don't even know if Bonnie's going to see this, but I'm going to shout her out anyway. Anyway, that's the Trek Files on Facebook and wherever you get your podcasts. Facebook has the documents that we show. And of course, Saturdays wouldn't be Saturday without Life Sport Live at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 Eastern, 6 UK time, 7 Central Europe. Dr. Ali and Dr. Trek, one of us is a real doctor, going boldly through uncertain times. We have a different theme every week. We had a watch along a couple of weeks ago. Check out the Facebook page, Life Support Live, and we're looking for a theme for this week and for future weeks. So come in and join us, and of course, be part of that community too. One more shout out real quick, once again, just a mention for friends of Michael Braveheart. Michael was Ensign Martinez, the nurse that was at Dr. Crusher's side through so much of Next Generation, the first two movies, and never said a word. He's had some medical issues. He has a $3,000 GoFundMe, very modest one, for medical and logistical issues. He's in New York. We're trying to get him out where he can talk to fans and on the circuit. And he's over halfway to his goal. Keeps creeping up there in a little bit you can throw his way on GoFundMe, guys. Other than that, hey, I appreciate you being here with me right now. If you're on YouTube, that is my Twitter at Larry Nemecek. And on Facebook, that's my Instagram, Larry Nemecek's Trekland. And if you, seriously, guys, if you really appreciate the way I approach Star Trek head on, or Star Trek coming at it from an angle, or some of these Star Trek tangents that may kind of, crack a new little shine some light on way that you understand everything Star Trek, from the meta to the maxi. No, from the large to the small scale, micro to macro. Just jump in with us in Portal 47. We have a mini-con all year long, is the way we say it, for all the Star Trek fans who have no idea how much Star Trek they have no idea about, in all the levels. And yeah, we can deep dive with the best of them on old trivia, deep diving layers. What I love to do is bring you all the voices that people have never heard before, or rarely heard. All the background folks that worked on every show. And yeah, we have had original series creatives with us. Anyway, portal47.net is the place to check that out. I really wish you would consider it if you enjoy this. Otherwise, that's going to do it for me. Everybody, hang on. I'm going to take a break. We'll be back and look at the parrots. We will look at all the chat stream. I want to see what I stirred up. But if you're watching us later on YouTube, I'm going to leave you now. I just want to first say, stay healthy out there, okay? Do all the smart things. We ain't out of this yet. Okay? Stay woke. Expand your mind. Check the sources. Don't fight with somebody that doesn't really exist and they're just there to make you angry and upset and disaffected. Go home and not say your piece or think your thought. Okay? Most of all, as always, truck well, everybody.